Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. In this video today, I'm going to give you a brief explanation of the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints. I have a number of students that have asked me to kind of explain, even though they know the concept, meaning that it's the different joints in the body. But why is it important to know this? How does it help you from a training perspective? And what do you need to know when it comes to passing the NASM exam? And I will say this before I show you on the screen here, that when we talk about the kinetic chain checkpoints, the best way to understand this is that your body, the human body, is in one sense one big dynamic movement bundle of muscles and joints and everything. So the idea is that you are connected everywhere from top of your head to your toes. You are in one sense connected from a movement pattern perspective. Anything I do with my head is going to ultimately affect my feet and vice versa. Now, I think intuitively that makes sense, but you got to be a little bit more, shall I say, exact, or a little bit more anatomically in tune with exactly what does that mean. Yes, I know that where my head goes, the rest of my body follows. I know that if I do something with my, watch this. I know if I do something with my wrist, then I can do, right? Isn't that cool when you see people do that, dancers? That's kind of cool. Well, that kind of explains the kinetic chain checkpoint phenomenon. Now, keep in mind when we talk about the kinetic chain checkpoints, or when NASM talks about it, they talk about 5. Well, aren't there more than 5 joints in the body? And the answer, of course, is, well, yes, of course. But these are the gross motor control areas of when I say gross motor control, I'm talking about those main joint areas that have the major effect on the human movement system. So how many joints are located in the pelvis? Now, we talk about, just for instance, the LPHC, lumbopelvic hip complex. But in reality, that's not one joint. Obviously, there's probably 1, 2, 3, 5 or 6 like joints. Some of them have a little bit of movement, some have more movement. The point is we don't want you to memorize all of that. We want you to memorize that it's the LPHC, and that as a gross motor movement component of actually one of the major ones, it has a lot to do and a lot of effect on everything else in your body, which is why NASM discusses the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints. And again, these are going to be within the context, generally the context of static postural and dynamic postural assessments. And it makes a lot of sense, just so you understand. Any issues outside of this, conditions related to the smaller, more intrinsic joints, for instance, in the spinal column, things like that, that's for clinicians to deal with, generally not for personal trainers. And what NASM really wants you to get from this, and this is in chapter 12, by the way, is that anything you do movement pattern wise is going to have a profound effect generally through all the other parts and joints of the body. And again, I think that makes sense intuitively. It's also, from the static postural assessment, a great way to see what's been going on for years and years and years in a person's life. And I guess we lose this perspective, but a 40-year-old man or 50-year-old man or 60-year-old woman, anybody that comes in that's been living decades and decades, are going to show signs of incorrect or improper posture, and weaknesses and overactive strengthening of muscles that are going to show up, sometimes not clearly, but sometimes very clearly, in their posture. And that's why the postural distortions, which I'm going to go over a little bit with you, is so important. So I just want to give you kind of a brief review of this information. Again, we're in chapter 12, and I've spoken about each of these issues that you will see with the static postural assessment, pes planus, upper cross and lower cross syndrome. But I don't want to go over that in this video. I just want to kind of give you an overview of the kinetic chain checkpoints. Now, first and foremost, I'm just going to give you a general guideline here, is to make sure you know and you memorize what they are, what you're going to see with them and the issues that are related to postural distortions within the kinetic chain checkpoint system. So the 5 areas of the body that are monitored during movement assessments. And what are they? The foot and the ankle, right? Feet, ankles, the knees, the LPHC, or the pelvis, the hips, pelvis, what we call the complex of the lumbar pelvic hip. Shoulders, right? The entirety of the shoulder area. That includes the shoulder joint and the shoulder, what we call the shoulder girdle, and the head. Now, just keep in mind, this right here is really important to know and memorize, because we're not memorizing these guys just to memorize them. We memorize them. We learn about them to help us to see the problems that are associated at each particular area. By the way, you'll notice, again, keep this in mind, this is why we talk about the entirety of the kinetic chain. You'll notice that when you do a static or dynamic postural assessments, any of those, you don't look at just the ankles and the knees. What do? You look at all 5 of them, because even when you're doing a squat during a overhead squat assessment, yeah, there's stuff happening at the shoulders and the neck that are really, really important. In this case, the static postural assessments, when somebody's standing there and you look at them from the front and from the side, you can tell a lot, not just at the, and by the way, it's the ankles and the knees that may be causing other issues at the pelvis and the shoulder, or vice versa. This is why it's so interesting when we do static assessments with folks, or when you're learning about this, that you keep in mind all of these guys right here are interrelated, and anything that occurs at the feet and ankles is going to affect the head and the neck. Again, we know this intuitively, but are you able to see it? Are you able to understand why, when one joint is at a place this way, it does a compensatory or causes a compensatory pattern in other joints up the kinetic chain? So I just wanted to kind of show you that one of the important areas that you definitely want to read through and understand is the anterior view, figure 12.2, and the lateral view when you're dealing with these static postural assessments. Again, the key element from a purely memorization perspective is over on the right side of the screen here, but in your book, it's a side panel, right? So read through these here, understand what these words mean, what these concepts are, so that when you get to looking at the actual figures, you can understand what I already previously showed you. The issues that will be related to distortion patterns. Let me say that again. You need to know what the normal front view, lateral view is for each of these five kinetic chain checkpoints. You need to know what is normal. You got to understand that a, quote, normal LPHC is like this, not like this. Once you know what is normal, it's easy to understand the distortion patterns, okay? Now, keep in mind, I'll just give you one example before I let you go. The LPHC, lumbopelvic hip complex, there is a normal lordotic curve associated with the lumbar spine, right? And that lumbar spinal curve is associated, normal lumbar spinal curve is associated with a normal tilt of the pelvis. You hear what I'm saying? Normal, whatever that means. Everybody is different, of course, but we know that under normal conditions for the average person, there's a curve, and therefore there is a associated pelvic tilt. It's when that normal lordotic curve, just as a for instance, is out of whack, an excessive lordotic curve or an excessive lordosis. That's when you're going to see, you might not, you as a trainer from a lateral view might not even see the excessive lordosis, because how do you see excessive lordosis unless it's like really arched up? We don't even have to do that. I don't have to do that. You know what I can look at? I can look at the pelvis, and I can see an anterior pelvic tilt. That's going to tell me that there's an excessive lordosis. Or maybe you don't see the excessive anterior tilt of the pelvis, or posterior, whichever it is, but you do see it in the lordotic or lordosis of the lower back. Point is what I want you to get from this is that when you're looking at those particular figures, you understand what is causing it. The normal lordotic curve at the LPHC, the normal positioning of the knees. Great example is the knee. Now remember, 5 kinetic chain checkpoints. Look at each of those. At the knee, for instance, we know that the normal, hear what I'm saying, and I'm putting it in air quotes, normal positioning of the knee is pretty much straight up and down. Now, women and men have different, what are known as Q angles. So a female, the femur of a woman is generally going to be angled a little bit more. That doesn't mean that she has knee valgus. It doesn't mean that. Normal for this particular woman might be, because she has a greater Q angle, right? Might be what for a guy would definitely be considered knee valgus, right? Knee valgus is simply when the knees cave in. Knee varus is when the knees kind of go out, right? So I guess you can say bow-legged, but look, folks, some people are normally bow-legged. That's normal for them. It's when it's in an excessive for that individual, when it's excessive inward or outward at the knee in this particular case, that's when it becomes sort of a problem. I hope that makes sense. And I'm focusing on the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints. The point is that I want you to be able to look at the ankles and the feet, look at the knee, the pelvis, right, the shoulder, the neck and head areas, so you understand what quote normal is, what the expectations are from looking at a person from the front and from the side, and that should help you ultimately to see where the distortion patterns now come in. Once you get that, you understand those 5 kinetic chain checkpoints and the positional problems that people have. Now it makes sense when you understand the muscles that work over those joints, the major muscles. Now I hope you can understand why it's relatively easy to know or to see why this particular muscle is overactive and this particular muscle is underactive, or shortened and lengthened, whatever terms you want to use. I hope that makes sense. Look, if this did make sense to you, go ahead and write the word in the comment box for me, please. Understood. If you're confused, don't write confused. Just say, could you please explain this better in your next video? Something like that. I don't mind getting criticism if you don't understand it, but please let me know if you understood it. Put it in the comment box. By the way, in the description box, you'll find a link to the NASM exam study, which gives you all of the necessary materials and resources to help pass your NASM exam, chapter reviews for all the chapters in the textbook, audio, quizzes, and practice exams. Let us know how we can be of assistance. Have a great week. I always enjoy doing these videos for you. Just let me know if we can help in any way. Thanks. Have a great week.